I broke off my engagement to my fiancé after realizing he secretly never wanted kids, but still used the idea of our future children to manipulate me into giving up my name, my career, and my independence. Now everyone's telling me I overreacted. I'm 33 female, and I broke up with my fiancé, 34 male, almost 2 years ago. There were many factors involved in our breakup, but one of the biggest turning points was something that at first seemed small: the conversation about my last name. It sounds silly when I say it out loud, but it became the domino that knocked everything else down. When I started telling people about it later, once I felt emotionally stable enough to explain, I got really mixed responses. My mom thinks I overreacted and threw away a good relationship over something that doesn't matter. Some of my sisters are on my side and completely understand why it was such a big deal. My friends are all over the place, some confused why either of us made it an issue at all, others telling me they get it. Even my bridesmaids were split. A few said I was right to stand my ground. Others told me I should have compromised and worked it out. The thing is, I can't shake the guilt. Almost 2 years later, I still find myself replaying it in my head and wondering, did I do the right thing? Did I ruin something that could have been fixed? Here's what happened. When John and I first got engaged, a close friend who had gone through a messy divorce told me, "Have the hard conversations now. Don't assume you're on the same page just because you love each other. Talk about money, kids, religion, names, all of it, before the wedding." Trust me. That advice really stuck with me. I've always believed that the strongest relationships are built on honesty and mutual respect. So, not long after our engagement, I decided to test the waters with what I thought was a small and manageable conversation: the name change. Some background. My dad had mostly daughters and only one of my brothers has a son. That means that, realistically, the family name might fade out pretty soon. My younger sister was the one who first pointed this out years ago. When she had her son, she and her husband actually decided to hyphenate their child's last name, partly to keep the family name alive. I always admired that. For me personally, I love my last name. It's part of my identity. It's tied to my dad, who worked his whole life to give us stability. It's tied to my childhood, my heritage, and honestly, my sense of self. I never wanted to give it up just because tradition said I had to. So, when John and I were engaged, I brought it up. I thought I was being considerate. I didn't just say, "This is what I want, and you have to agree." Instead, I laid out options. I asked if he'd be open to hyphenating his last name with mine. Or maybe if we could hyphenate our children's names. Or if he was really open-minded, he could even consider taking my name. I tried to frame it as a conversation, not an ultimatum. John listened, and at first he said he kind of understood where I was coming from. But then he told me his side. He explained that he was an only child, and his father was also an only child, raised as an orphan. He said because of that, he felt an enormous sense of duty to carry on his family name. Even though he didn't have a good relationship with his dad, he admitted he didn't like him much at all. The name, to him, symbolized survival and continuation. He said he'd regret it forever if he didn't pass it on. I remember sitting there, feeling this mix of emotions. On one hand, I did understand. I could see how his name carried meaning for him that went beyond his father. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore how unbalanced the conversation felt. Why was my connection to my name negotiable, but his wasn't? Why was I expected to sacrifice my identity in the name of tradition, while his traditions were non-negotiable? After some back and forth, I ended up telling him that if it really mattered that much to him, I would take his last name. I remember saying it out loud, and feeling like a piece of me was slipping away. I told myself marriage was about compromise, and maybe this was just one of those times when I had to bend. But here's the problem. Once that conversation was resolved, it never really left me. I kept replaying it in my mind, feeling this gnawing resentment. Because in my heart, it wasn't a compromise, it was me folding. He hadn't budged an inch. He had listened, but he hadn't validated me. He had acknowledged my feelings, but not in a way that left space for them to matter. After the whole name conversation, I felt a little off. Not just because of the topic itself, but because of how John handled it. It showed me that sometimes, what I thought would be an open conversation was actually just me bending to his expectations while he stayed firm. But I brushed it aside at the time, told myself marriage is compromise, and decided to keep trying. A little while later, I thought I'd bring up another hard topic. This time, it was about work and parenting. For context, I've always been career-driven. I don't just have a job. I have a career that I've built brick by brick, with promotions on the horizon, mentors who believed in me, and a genuine love for what I do. John, on the other hand, worked freelance. He traveled a lot, but the key difference was his philosophy about work. He made it very clear to me, over and over again, that he only worked as much as he needed. No more, no less. If he had bills, he worked just enough to cover them. If he wanted to buy his mom a nice gift for Christmas, he'd pick up more jobs. But beyond that, he saw no reason to grind, or climb the way I did. I actually respected that about him in some ways. It felt free-spirited, almost admirable, not being chained to a 9 to 5. But when I started thinking about the future, especially with kids, it suddenly didn't seem so carefree anymore. So I asked him one night, "What do you think about stay-at-home versus working parents? Like, what would we do if we had kids?" He looked at me, genuinely confused, and said, "Well, obviously you'd be a stay-at-home mom." That answer floored me. I stared at him for a second and then asked, point blank, "Wait, I make 3 times what you do. You want me to quit my career, the one I've worked my whole life for, while you keep freelancing? How exactly do you think we'd raise kids on your income when you can barely feed yourself some months?" He didn't get defensive exactly, at least not at first. He just repeated what he always said, "I only work as much as I need. If we had kids, I'd work more. I'd take more jobs, earn more money, do whatever it takes." But that didn't make me feel better. I pictured him flying all over the world, gone for weeks at a time, while I sat at home with kids I had given up my dreams for. I told him as much. So basically, you'd be gone all the time, and I'd be stuck alone raising them. That's not what I want. He tried to reassure me. No, I'd just take jobs closer to home. I'd make sure you didn't feel abandoned. But here's where things took a turn. I asked him, gently, "What if we flip it? What if you stayed home with the kids, and I kept working? What if I was the breadwinner?" He didn't just say no. He got offended. His face hardened, and he shot back. "Are you saying I can't provide for my family? That's my job. The wife has to stay home. Even if there aren't kids, that's just what the wife does." I felt like I had been slapped. It wasn't just that he disagreed, it was the way he said it. Like it was obvious, like there was no room for negotiation. Like my career, my ambitions, my financial stability meant nothing compared to his fragile sense of manhood. After that conversation, I had to let the topic drop for a while. It was clear we weren't even in the same universe when it came to values. But here's the kicker. He didn't let me drop it. Over the following weeks, he kept bringing it up, almost teasing me, saying things like, "Don't worry, I'll get you to quit your job eventually," or "You'll see, staying home is what you're supposed to do." He thought he was being charming, but all I felt was cornered. And then came the next big one, children. When we were dating, I had already told John about a medical condition I have that might make it difficult to get pregnant. Not impossible, but not easy either. At the time, he had seemed sympathetic. He held my hand, told me it didn't matter, and said we'd figure things out. But in hindsight, I realized we never actually had a real conversation about children. So, I brought it up one evening. I told him that I had always wanted kids. And not just one kid, because I've seen how lonely only children can get. But not a dozen either, because I grew up in a big family where some of us fell through the cracks. I said ideally I'd love 2 or 3. And if my condition made it hard or impossible for me to get pregnant, I was absolutely open to adoption or fostering. I even told him that fostering was something I'd dreamed about for years, because there are so many kids who need homes. I thought this was a sweet, hopeful conversation, me opening up about my dreams for a family, inviting him to share his. Instead, his face darkened, and his first response wasn't excitement or curiosity. It was, "No, absolutely not. We're not adopting." Here's where things started to really unravel between John and me. After I opened up about wanting kids, fostering or adopting if necessary, John looked me dead in the eye and told me he didn't want kids. At all. Not just not right now. Not maybe someday. Not let's see what happens. He meant it. He said if a biological child somehow came his way, he'd love it, but he didn't want to try for kids. He didn't want to adopt, didn't want to foster, didn't want to go through treatments if I struggled to conceive. He wanted a child only if it basically fell into his lap by accident. I was floored. We had been engaged for almost 6 months at this point, and in all that time, he never once told me he didn't want kids. Not while dating, not while talking about marriage, not while talking about the future. He had actually done the opposite. He used the idea of our future children as leverage. When I brought up the name change conversation, he leaned heavily on the idea that our kids should share one family name, and that's part of what convinced me to change mine to his. When I asked about me being a working mom or him potentially being a stay-at-home dad, he rejected that idea entirely, insisting that I'd eventually quit my job so I could take care of him and the kids. But not once did he say, "Well, I don't really want kids anyway, so that's not going to be an issue." That was the part that broke something in me. It wasn't that he didn't want children, because honestly, if he'd told me that from the start, I think I could have accepted it. Yes, kids were something I wanted, but I also already knew my medical condition might mean I couldn't have biological kids anyway. If my partner had said children aren't in my vision for life, I would have coped. I would have adjusted. I might even have found peace with it because at least it would have been honest. But that's not what happened. Instead, John used the possibility of children to try to control me. He dangled our future kids in front of me as a way to push his own agenda, that I should give up my last name, that I should quit my career, that I should mold myself into his version of a wife. He weaponized something that mattered to me deeply, while secretly holding a completely different truth in his back pocket. That realization haunted me. It wasn't just about kids anymore, it was about trust. It was about manipulation. It was about how willing he was to twist my values to suit his needs while never once being vulnerable about his own. I sat with that for a long time. I tried to bring it up with him gently a few times, but his responses were always dismissive. He'd say things like, "You're overthinking it," or, "We'll figure it out later." But the truth was out. He didn't want kids, and he'd been pretending otherwise when it benefited him. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't picture myself marrying someone who would withhold something so fundamental until after I had given up things that mattered to me. I couldn't picture myself living a life where my dreams, my career, my body, and even my name were bargaining chips in a game I hadn't agreed to play. So I ended it. I called off the engagement. At first, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I remember waking up the next morning and feeling like I could breathe again, like a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying had finally been lifted. For the first year after, I didn't regret my decision at all. I knew in my bones that it was the right thing to do. But then came the aftermath. When I started opening up to friends and family about why we broke up, the reactions were mixed, to put it mildly. My mom thought I overreacted. She told me, "Lots of men say they don't want kids, but they change their minds once they get older." Some of my sisters defended me, saying manipulation is manipulation no matter what. My friends were confused, some of them genuinely not understanding why it was such a big deal. Even my bridesmaids were split. Half told me I did the right thing, the other half thought I should have tried harder to work it out. And that's when the guilt started creeping in. Because the truth is, if I had been completely okay with never having children, then technically, John's stance wouldn't have been a deal breaker. It could have been something we both lived with. But I can't shake the feeling that the real issue wasn't about kids at all. It was about the way he handled it. The way he misled me. The way he knew children mattered to me, knew my medical history made it complicated, and still chose to use that against me while hiding the fact that he didn't want them in the first place. That feels like betrayal. That feels like manipulation. And it makes me wonder, if he could lie or twist the truth about something as big as having children, what else would he have done the same way? So here I am, almost 2 years later, eaten alive by guilt and second-guessing myself. Part of me wonders if I should have just shrugged it off, told myself it didn't matter, and married him anyway. But the other part of me, the part that still hears his voice saying, "I'll get you to quit your job eventually," knows deep down that I couldn't build a marriage on that foundation. And yet, I still wonder, did I overreact? Did I do the wrong thing? Or did I save myself from a lifetime of being slowly erased, one compromise at a time? What would do if you were in this kind of situation? I have always wondered, should I go back to him? If I do, I don't think he's going to accept me. Or not, I am feeling like I'm in some kind of guilt for not thinking about the future. What should I do? I'm just confused a lot.